Hi guys, so I'm coming on today to just do another Faith Chronicles video, and this one is actually going to be about prayer as well as what was going on the actual day of my exam. So the Saturday came that my exam was scheduled for, and where was I? I was at church. And so one of the members asked me, when is the exam? Because they couldn't remember. I was like, it's today, and I'm here. And so it was a little bit of a big, imagine that, a little bit of a big, but it was a big deal for them that I was there. And so they announced it and they told everyone, this young lady, she has her exam today and she's here at church. And everybody was really pleased that I would have stood up for God in this circumstance. And then what happened that day, they had prayer sessions. They had a prayer session for me, and the guy that was preaching, he didn't know about my situation beforehand, but he learned of it that day. And throughout his sermon, he was calling my name and he was saying, this is for you and this message is for you today, because his sermon was actually called Hope for the Valley Christian. And basically what it was about is that when you are in the valley and you're going through your circumstances, that there's hope for you because God will be there with you. And so that was the message of the sermon that day. And what he was also pointing out is that without these valleys, the mountaintop experience is worthless. And I actually did a presentation the other day, and I used part of that in my presentation, because how are you going to enjoy the mountain? How are you going to enjoy being up top there if you've never known what it was like to be in the valley? It's not as exciting. It's not as, you've known that for so long, you don't understand how joyous it is to be there unless you've been low. And so that sermon was really good for me, and the fact that he was walking up and down, so he's coming there to where I was sitting, and it was a beautiful sermon. I wish I had some actual notes from it. But also there was a sermon the very next week, because God was just speaking to me back to back to back. And the next sermon was actually the week after that. I had done my written examinations, and then there was a sermon called The Prayer Victory at Carmel, and I have some notes from that one. And what that sermon was about, it was about Elijah and his Mount Carmel experience. Yes, he called on God to prove to those people that he was God, and the fire came down. Despite all the water that was in these trenches around the altar, the fire lapped it all up. And those people who were running around slashing themselves and calling on the unknown God was able to see that Jehovah was God of all. So he asked for fire. There was a drought in the land. What's done? He got the water to put in the trenches. God sent the fire and lapped it up. After that, he had to pray for God to send rain upon the land. And in doing that, it wasn't a one-time prayer like how it was for the fire. Elijah had to pray 7 times until a cloud appeared. At prayer after prayer, there were no signs that there was going to be rain. And so Elijah had to persevere, and he had to pray and ask God to send the rain. And so what was happening in this sermon, he was comparing how one prayer was sufficient when God sent the fire, but then Elijah had to pray 7 times to get the rain or any signs of rain. And therefore there were 4 points and 4 lessons that we gleaned from the 2 victories that Elijah had. The first lesson was faith, and it says, or what I was able to gather and write down while he was preaching, is that prayer must be rooted in faith. The one who goes to God must believe that he is. We must reverence and obey him. We are to follow him. We want to tell God what we want and how, but God knows best. Sometimes he will give what we ask, and sometimes, we have to wait. just like in this situation with Elijah. Then we learn that there's fervency, or that there needs to be fervency and perseverance in prayer. The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Elijah was perseverant till the answer came. If God says he's going to do it, he will. God cannot lie. God will honor our faith. And so all now I'm thinking, I've stood up for God and the exam has passed and I don't know what's going to happen. But then God sent this sermon, I will honor your faith. Sometimes God needs to prepare us first. Our will must be intertwined with his. And actually recently, not at the same time as this sermon, but recently I was talking to a friend of mine about a text in the Bible, and I had just read it and it was amazing to me, and I just had to share it with him. And I told him that sometimes God delays to us, but sometimes God doesn't answer us immediately because we don't have enough faith in him. He needs to get us at that point where our will is intertwined with his before he gives us an answer. Because sometimes God's answer is no. And he knows that we have so little faith and that we're doubting and that we're wavering, that if he was to tell us that no, that we would probably totally break down and lose all faith in him. And so sometimes God needs to prepare us first before he gives us the answer. And sometimes that's why you have to be fervent and perseverant in prayer, because God is working on you before he can answer.